So this morning's text is a powerful one. It comes from Colossians. Colossians is a letter. We call it a book in the Bible, right? The Bible isn't a book kind of like a novel. It's a bunch of books that are put together that have been deemed spiritual or holy or inspired by God that we have in the Bible. And some of them, they're all different kinds, right? There's poetry, there's prose. These are letters. They call them epistles, and they come from Paul. Paul wrote 13 of them in the New Testament. He's the one that wrote the most in the New Testament. And did you ever write an email or a letter to somebody and put chapter and verse numbers in it? So like later on when you're talking to them on the phone, you can say, hey, in that email I sent you, in chapter 3, verse 2, I said this. Did you ever do that? No, because nobody does that, right? Well, Paul didn't do that either. When he wrote these letters, they were letters. They were letters to churches that he either started, that he visited, or that he wanted to visit. The scholars put in chapter and verse numbers so that we could refer more easily to them when we were talking with other Christians about Bible. So anyway, what Paul wrote Colossians, and it's broken into two parts. The first two chapters are theology, and it's great theology. It's really hopeful. It's filled with a little bit of what we talked about this morning, and I want to unpack that for you because it gets a little tricky. But then the last two chapters are really practical. And what Paul does often is in his letters, the last parts of his letters either have to-do lists or not to-do lists or both. So when you think about in your life what your to-do list is, if it was like around Christmas time and it was Advent and we had the beautiful Advent wreath and like I start thinking about what my New Year's resolution is going to be, like what I need to do. You know, sometimes it's the not to do, like I want to cut out calories or you know, but this is a goal-focused sermon based on Paul's text. And what Paul is saying here, you heard the word circumcision a lot in here. You also heard the words powers and authorities. And he talks about philosophies. And what Paul is doing with the church in Colossae, I have so much trouble saying that, Colossae, he's telling them, don't get sucked in to the world's to-do list that's not God's to-do list. You follow that? So back then, the culture was telling them they needed to do certain things. Paul was saying, what they're telling you isn't going to be helpful for you. It's going to cause trouble for you. And it's not what Jesus came and proclaimed. What's the world telling us today? What works for the world? I would like to suggest three things to you. You know, as we're talking it through, you can be thinking about what you think as well. But I think the number one problem the number one thing that the world tells us we need to participate in, to do, that causes a lot of trouble, has to do with greed. Markets, money, stuff. The second, I think, is sexuality. If you watch TV, it's not hard to see how it's pushed upon us, this hypersexual message. The last, I would suggest, is power. And I think a lot of that we can see just in the politics of our own country today, But I grew up at the tail end of the Cold War, and I remember the nuclear proliferation and how we had to have all of this huge military that couldn't be outdone because we had to have this power. And I think that power is just this thing that we're told by the world. So I think the message that I get, at least out of the world that I live in, we all live in our own little worlds, right? Is that I don't have enough money, I don't have enough sex, and I don't have enough power. Or you could say it, I need more money, I need more sex, I need more power. That's the world's to-do list in my frame. So Paul is talking in here about the circumcision and philosophies, and what he's saying is that in his culture to this church, they're hearing this message of if you do the right things, you will attain a relationship with God, a place in heaven, a certain level in society. And what Paul is telling them is it's not what you do that puts you in a relationship with God. It's what Jesus has done that puts you in a relationship with God. And you can be part of that by having faith in that. So you don't have to be circumcised, because there were a bunch of people at the time saying, well, if you want to be a Christian, if you want to be a follower of Christ, which gives you a place in heaven and gives you all of this stuff, then you need to get circumcised. And Paul is saying, well, first off, it's not about getting stuff and getting to heaven. It's about your relationship with God. And Jesus is the one that solidified that for you, not whether or not you're circumcised, not whether or not you're living by the Jewish law or any other law. It's what Jesus did for you. The second thing that Paul talks about is he talks about these powers and principalities. And what he's really talking about, he's talking a little bit about the political structure, I think, of the time, but he's really going after the things that we can't see. Paul is adamant about there's spiritual forces at work in this world, and there are things going on that we're not even privy to. Why do we pray for the kids at Ignite? Why do I pray for my kids? Because they're in situations all the time with people, and it's not even just the people, it's these powers and spiritual forces that are all over the place that are working that we can't even see. And Paul says Jesus has power even over them. So, just like we have witchcraft going on today, they had it back then. So he's keying into that. I want to bring to you the sexual piece too. I think that Paul talks about it over and over and over in his letters. And he says it's toxic. It destroys people. It destroys relationships. It's not healthy for us. That's not. Let me back up a minute. I don't want to get you way off base, because you're probably sitting there going, I shouldn't ever have sex with my wife. Well, I have 4 kids, so maybe I shouldn't have, but no. Paul is talking about fornication, prostitution, adultery. He's talking about sexual sin, not the blessing that God has given us in committed relationships. And he says sexual sin destroys lives. And I could take a lot of time with you. Maybe I'll do a sermon series on it at one point. But the bottom line is that if sin is something that pulls us away from God, that draws us away from God, that puts up barriers, with us and God, And sin is also something that creates barriers with us and other people. Sexual sin is something that causes barriers between us and God and us and people. Just like greed, just like anger, just like lust. Lust is the sexual. Anyway, so I wanted to share that with you because it's a common theme that Paul constantly hits on, and I think we see it in our society with what we're pushed through media. So I don't know what would be on your not to do list, but I have. I'm going to wrap it up real quick for you. If you take a look at page 2 in your bulletin, what I want you to have is there for you. What the overarching message, I think, of Colossians 6 through 15 is, and a lot of Paul's writing is, don't get sucked in to doing things that you shouldn't be doing. So what's the not to do list? I think in order to find that, you need to take some time on a regular basis and just do self-evaluation and ask yourself, what are the thoughts that I'm having that maybe I can add to the not to do list? Or what are the things that I'm doing that I could add to the not to do list? So there are some things, if you take some time, there are some things that you will find out that you're doing that are necessary, but you shouldn't be doing them. So we have, in my house, we have a philosophical difference, to use Paul's word. I believe that my teenager's bedroom, should be clean. The philosophical difference in the house is that my teenagers believe that their room doesn't need to be clean. But I'm the king of the house. So that's probably a philosophical difference they have as well. But here's the thing. I believe that it's necessary. I think it's necessary. So if I go and clean their room, I'm doing something that I believe is necessary, but not that I should do. So what should you do about that? Delegate it. It's a whole nother battle that you got to fight with teenagers. But delegate. If you think about all the things you do in your life, some of the things are necessary, but they're not necessarily things you need to be doing. So those things that are necessary that aren't needed to be doing, that you don't need to be doing, delegate them. I have 3 Ds, right? Delegate. This one is direct, all right? If you look at number 2, what are the items or thoughts that aren't necessary? So I shouldn't tell you this. Do you ever play Yahtzee? I like Yahtzee. I'm lucky. I get Yahtzee all the time. Nobody likes to play with me. Did you know that there's an app on your phone where you can play Yahtzee? And not only can you play Yahtzee solo, but you can play Yahtzee with your friends. I don't have patience sometimes to play with my friends. They take too long to roll, so I prefer to play by myself. Here's the thing. I like Yahtzee. It's not necessarily something that I need to be doing. It's not necessary. And have you ever opened an app up on your phone? I know for some of you, you don't get into Minecraft. But you can get lost in little worlds for hours. What's your favorite TV show? Yeah, This Is Us is a big one right now, right? Um, a fave in my house is Parks and Rec. But it's really bad because you can sit down and you can binge watch like a whole season. And like 4 hours goes by and my kids are like, "Dad, I'm hungry." I'm like, "Go talk to your mom." I love it, but it's not necessary. There are a lot of things, I think, if you take time and evaluate, there are things that are okay. They're okay to do. It's not bad to play Yahtzee, or it's not bad to watch TV shows. But when it impinges on other stuff that would be good for you to do, or whatever. Number two, here's the fix: direct. Delegate is number one for those things that are necessary that you're doing that you don't need to be doing. The second, for the items that aren't necessary, is direct yourself in those times. Be disciplined to prayer, thoughts, or something that's important to you. Right? So just take prayer, thought. Just take yourself out of that space for a moment. Distract yourself and direct yourself in the direction of something that is good and necessary for you to do. Last on the not to do list is the challenging one, I think, for me. What are those things in your life that just screw you up, like mess you up, that you shouldn't be doing? These are the sinful things. And I don't know about you, but in my life, sin has this way that it's systemic. Like you do something here, and it's like a rock in the pond, and it just ripples, and it ripples. And the longer you take to stop the ripple, the worse it gets. And that's what Paul's talking about. Like, if you give these powers and authorities that we can't see nor understand the opportunity through our sin to create bigger barriers with people and with God, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So to stop those things from happening, to when you do that self-evaluation, disciple, draw close to God. What Paul is saying in the passage this morning is that Christ has conquered everything. Christ has given everything because he loves you, because he cares for you so much that nothing, no amount of greed, no amount of hypersexuality, no amount of power, nothing can separate you from God because of what Christ has done in your life. And don't get it backwards. It's not about what you do. We're trying to not do stuff so that you can focus more on God's love and God's blessing for you and God's provision in your life and the good news of Jesus Christ, because he has conquered everything. But you don't have to earn it. It's just a gift. And the more you can do to draw close to God and draw close to the people around you, in good, healthy relationships, the more you will see the hand of God at work in your life and in this community. And it will be so powerful. So as we close out this series, I just want to encourage you, take some time and evaluate where you are, at least once, if not on a regular basis. And think about the things that maybe should be on your not to-do list, and what you can delegate, and what you can direct yourself to. And when you think about how much God loves you, just give yourself to him in discipleship. Just let him have your heart. And he will protect you from everything, seen and unseen.